So as a background, I'll be 70 soon, and I was born in blue-collar Chicago to a Polish Catholic family. I had a wonderful experience growing up Catholic, and I ended up continuing Catholic education through grammar school, high school, college, master's, and then my doctoral degree in Washington, D.C. In my 20s, I started exploring world religions and various spiritual practices, and I continued doing that for many years. I had friends from different faiths. I loved reading and learning about what people believed, why they believed what they believed, and how they practiced their faith. My main explorations were in the Native American religion, Buddhism, the Mormon religion, Hinduism, Judaism, and various branches of Christian denominations, plus Catholicism. I discovered Rudolf Steiner's work in anthroposophy when my oldest daughter started attending a Waldorf preschool. I knew I had finally found my path because it was all Christ-centered, but it was with a belief in reincarnation in anthroposophy that was taught in a way that made total sense to me. Steiner focused on the evolution of human consciousness and the concepts of freedom and responsibility and the development of our soul forces of thinking, of feeling, and of willing, which align with the three transcendentals of truth, beauty, and goodness. I've been a student of anthroposophy since 1989, and I have embraced it as my guiding light for both my spiritual development in Catholicism and for my vocational work in sacred geometry and energy therapy. Holistic healthcare became a prominent interest in 1986 when I gave birth to the first of my three daughters. And since I was a doctoral student at Catholic University of America in DC, I attended hearings on Capitol Hill because my aspiration was to become politically involved and to help transform our healthcare system to become more holistic and naturally oriented. But I discovered how pervasive the influence was of Big Pharma and the American Medical Association, neither of which were in favor of natural or holistic healthcare. It was all about pushing drugs, and I witnessed a lot of corruption in politics firsthand, and I became very discouraged with politics and mainstream healthcare, and I changed my vocational path to hands-on healing and energy therapies, first with therapeutic touch for 10 years and then into healing touch. Then I re-immersed myself in Catholicism. I went around the block a few times and became part of the traditional Latin Mass community several years ago. And I ended up dedicating some of my time to learning about the corruption and the dark side of religion, of Christianity and Catholicism. I learned how religion, like all the institutions of our government and our social systems, education, healthcare, entertainment, all have been infiltrated by dark forces, such as secret societies, Luciferic groups, but that's a topic for another day. I love being Catholic. I'm also aware of the corruption that has occurred historically and currently in the church, including at the very top of the hierarchy. However, because I experience such a deep sense of mysticism, peace, and spiritual connection, truth, beauty, and goodness through my faith, I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but I choose instead to be a force for the good and to fight as needed for the church's purification. Much is being exposed, as you know, and I pray for its purification. In 1995, I became the director of Healing Touch Program's research department, and I immersed myself for 5 years in the research related to energy therapy. And I had this wild idea that, oh, if I just read enough research and participate and talk with all these researchers, that I would actually understand how energy therapy works. And it would make me a better instructor and a better leader. But ironically, after 5 years in this role, I felt like I actually knew less than I knew at the beginning because of the vastness and the esoteric nature of this topic. It was very eye-opening and humbling, but it was a wonderful life lesson. And, as you go down the rabbit hole of energy therapy and sacred geometry, even though I was starting to put a few pieces of the puzzle together, the puzzle just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's now like a 1 million piece puzzle. And I only have a few pieces figured out, but that's okay. Okay, about 20 years ago, the founder of Healing Touch program, Janet Menken, she asked me to take her place as the director as her health was declining. So I served in that role for 15 years. I taught all the course levels, I trained instructors, I traveled extensively. I wrote curriculum and articles, I presented at conferences and met thousands of amazing, striving, heart-centered men and women who wanted to learn how to use their hands and hearts to help others to heal. It was a dream career in many ways that formed who I am today. After retiring from this leadership position in 2018, I embarked on developing a course that I had great interest in for the last 20 years, and that was the application of sacred geometry to energy therapy. The last 5 years, I've been focused on my private practice in sacred geometry and in teaching the course for its practical application in healing. In my sessions with clients, I am always in conversations with God, who for me is the Christian Trinity, the Christ being, the Blessed Mother, Archangel Michael, mine and my clients' guardian angels, and sometimes deceased friends or saints on the other side of the threshold. Some of you may have viewed the intro video on my website before this presentation, but if not, you could go there anytime. The website is boulderhealingtouch.com. In addition to teaching and practicing sacred geometry, I also teach body prayer, which is a more universal version of what Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy, calls eurythmy. And in that practice, I have joined prayers with cosmic meaningful gestures to enhance and actually physically embody the experience of prayer and in talking with our beloved Creator. I also travel for my teaching, so I'll be headed out to Charlotte, North Carolina next month, and to Wisconsin in May and Colorado in April. So now let's move on to a few gems. I was trying to think of, what are 5 things that I could share with you that I feel I have learned from 40 years in energy therapy. And since many of you are practitioners in the holistic world, I thought it would be fun to kind of compare and see what you resonate with or if you agree or not. So the first gem I wanted to share is reminding us that energy therapy at its basic level is spiritual and religious. It addresses and works with the part of us that's invisible, our soul and spirit. And if you are not attending to purifying and developing your soul and spirit, you should not be delving into this branch of body, mind, spirit health, because it's too easy for one's ego to attribute healing results to oneself. The right attitude is remembering that God can use us to help others heal if we are willing to strive to be as pure an instrument as possible for God to work through us. Of course, we're all imperfect in our current state of being, but God does know our heart. And if we have purity of intention, and that's what really counts when we're asked to play a role in serving another human being in their healing process. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the second point, extrasensory perception. So you've all heard of clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and people who can sense things with their hands. So when I was a newbie at this in the early 1980s, everyone wanted to be able to see into the spiritual world and to feel things and to hear voices. And, it was something people aspired to. And the clair that I developed, of all these clairs, is something I call clair zippo. And that means I didn't develop any of those, even though I've been in this branch of healthcare for about over 40 years now. So my friends lovingly refer to me as being Claire Zippo. And actually, it's been quite a blessing to be a Claire Zippo, because then I don't have that temptation or that challenge to have to try to interpret things that may come that are not clearly interpretable. So I just want to reassure any of you in the healing arts that if you don't see things or hear things or feel things with your hands, that not only is that perfectly okay, that it actually may be a protection and a blessing. So you don't need that to be an effective healer. Okay, my third gem is, I want to say that dark forces exist and they're known by many names. I was very involved in New Age studies for a number of years, and I saw that many teachers would not acknowledge negative entities, dark spirits, satanic forces, or Luciferic energies. I have had firsthand experience with these, and they are not something to mess with. One must be armed, as Paul spoke to the Ephesians. One must be armed with the armor of God if you are going to delve into this area. I have learned that it is important to learn some basics about evil and to acknowledge its existence and the way it creates havoc in our lives, but not to focus on them or to engage with them in conversation. We are all called to do good in the world, but not everyone is called to fight evil. My fourth gem is about the concept of intention over technique. There are so many variations these days of hands-on healing in many schools of thought. Whatever type you practice or are drawn to, I encourage you to let the actual hands-on techniques or hand placements be secondary in your mindset. What is most important is your heart set and where your will is and your mind. In other words, the three most important ingredients are a pure intention to be an instrument of healing without any attachment to a specific outcome, trusting that God, higher power, is working through you and knows what is best. The second most important ingredient relates to having a compassionate heart that's gentle. The ability to stay in your heart through prayerful thoughts, affirmations, prayers, or images while you are in a healing session is most important. Thirdly, your will force, dedicating your hands. I assume your hands will be, touching or near body. Asking that your hands be the physical portal for the energy flow to be in alignment with God's will versus your own will. Not my will, but thy will be done. Don't get hung up on hand positions or timing or hand placements. Trust in Kairos time. That's God's time versus being stuck in your head or looking at a clock or being in your left brain and getting the techniques right. The bottom line is to ask for help in learning how to hold sacred space and to still your mind. Spoken by Elijah, be still and know that I am God. Just sitting with someone holding hands and speaking a prayer can be very, very powerful. I assume many of you have had that experience. All right, the fifth gem, healing is a mystery. I've been a lifelong avid student of theology, anthroposophy, world religions, world history, energy therapy, and the evolution of human consciousness. While over the years, I feel I've received a few pieces of the puzzle of the mystery of life, most of the time, I surrender to life's mystery, trusting that God has a plan for the world, for me, for humanity, and I don't have to overthink or overanalyze things that seem beyond my mind's intellect or my soul's wisdom. I try to balance my deep desire for understanding and integration with a good dose of trust in God, faith in truth, beauty, and goodness, and a sense of peace that surpasses all understanding. Every day, I experience life as being hard. Every day, I experience life as being wonderful. And my prayer must be that when life feels hard, that I would be grace-filled and faithful and trusting and patient. And that when life is feeling wonderful, that I be full of praise and thanks. So that's that part. Now we're going to transition a little bit into sacred geometry. So it's everywhere. I think some of you may already be a little familiar with it because if you're spiritually oriented and holistically oriented, then you're already in circles where you're seeing and hearing more about sacred geometry. It is a growing field. And I noticed that even your logo for Circle of Miracles is actually the seed of life. If you've noticed, it's the middle circle surrounded by 6 circles, and that's known as the seed of life. And we're actually going to use that symbol, that sacred geometric form in our experience this morning. I'd like to first define sacred geometry for you. So here goes. Traditionally, geometry is thought of as a science within the field of mathematics. Scientists, engineers, architects, they all depend on geometry to solve a myriad of problems of making life on Earth more practical, sustainable, and survivable. But on a deeper level, as quoted by Plato thousands of years ago, geometry is the clearest model by which to describe the metaphysical realm. Isn't that amazing? Geometry is the clearest model by which to describe the metaphysical realm. Did your geometry teacher ever tell you that back in high school? I know mine didn't. So for thousands of years, great thinkers, philosophers, artists, and scientists such as Pythagoras, Galileo, Plato, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci studied the shapes of the natural world, and they found common geometric forms within nature and within our bodies. They felt that through discovering these patterns, they could enter into a level of understanding the mind of God. So this study of sacred geometry takes place in the macrocosm, like in the skies and beyond of what we can even see. It takes place in the microcosm, in the realm of the world that is too small for us to see, such as our DNA, which is spiral in nature. and everything in between in the visible world. And the more I study sacred geometry, the more my faith grows, because I come into this place of awe and wonder and reverence and mystery and devotion. And I'm just in this great state of awe the more I see sacred geometry and I start to put a few pieces of the puzzle together. So one name that you might want to look up is Dr. Robert Gilbert. And if you just type him in and write the word sacred geometry, he's a favorite writer of mine. He's also a student of anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, which is my spiritual path. And he has deeply researched the geometric basis of modern science and the new technologies. And he clearly says geometry is the blueprint of creation and the genesis of all form. He defines sacred geometry as an ancient science which explores and explains the energy patterns that create and unify all things, and reveals the precise way that the energy of creation organizes itself. He tells us that on every scale, every natural pattern of growth or movement conforms inevitably to one or more geometric shapes. So what shapes am I talking about? You know, personally for me, in the course I teach and in the work I do, I work with 13 shapes. So some of the shapes you can think of as 2D, but many of them also have 3 dimensions. So there's the circle and the sphere, the infinity sign, the vesica Pisces, the triangle, the square or cube, 5-pointed star, 6-pointed star, 7-pointed star, 8-pointed star, the spiral and double helix, concentric circles, the heart, and the Sri Yantra. The 2 major concepts I work with are, well, you may have heard this if you've read like the ancient writings of Hermes Trismegistus, and he said, as above, so below. Have you heard that? As above, so below. And if you're familiar and pray the Lord's Prayer, that's even hinted to in the line where we say, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That brings the concept of as above, so below. The other concept I work with integrally is threefold healing. So our soul faculties are the human's ability to think, to feel, and to exert our will force. And you could think of the physical headquarters for thinking as the head, physical headquarters for feeling is the heart, and the physical headquarters for the will is really the whole physical body, and in particular, the lower trunk and the arms and the legs. So once you start to understand some of the shapes of sacred geometry, you will begin to see them in nature, you know, in flowers and in flow forms of water. You will see them in the physical body. You will be blown away with how it's everywhere. In the body, we have DNA, we have our muscles are in a spiral shape. Our heart muscle in particular, once you cut through the connective tissue, is in a spiral shape. The blood flows out of the aorta in a spiral flow. We have the golden mean proportions all over our body, including the length of every single physical part of our body. In nature, we see it in plants and animals, in water forms, in crystals. In the macrocosm, we see it in the nebula and the spiral galaxies and in the sphere shapes of the planets. We see it in the planetary orbits, which actually move in a spiral direction. So in my course, I actually I go in great depth into the cultural background of sacred geometry, and how the various religions embrace sacred geometry. I go into history a bit. I talk about symbolism and how each of the geometric forms are symbols that have been embraced by all cultures. I correlate it to the quality of numbers. And I also work with prayerful affirmations, which can be reworded based on, your own faith and your own concepts. So overall, I would say that this work has been so fascinating. It's been so fun. It's been mind-blowing. It has changed my life, and it makes me a more reverent person because I feel like I just go for a walk around the block and I'm always like in awe and wonder and reverence and humility because sacred geometry is everywhere.